Hey, what's going on, guys? Rome Gaming here, back with another video. Today's episode, I want to talk about Season of Discovery and some of the issues that I think we're having in Phase 3, what we can do to fix it moving forward, and just kind of my overall general impressions of Phase 3. So I think it's no surprise that we are kind of in a decline in terms of popularity with Season of Discovery. We got Kata coming out. We've got Miss Pandaria Remix. We're Within's coming out here pretty soon. There's just a lot of other things that Blizzard's focused on right now. So it's probably just not getting the attention that it needs. But outside of attention, I do think that there is some design issues with Phase 3. And this is just kind of a general list that you're seeing here. This isn't necessarily everything. I don't want to turn this into like an hour-long video. But this is just some of the main things that I think are kind of plaguing the game at the moment. So first item here, pre-raid bis should not come from the previous raid. So this is an argument coming from the standpoint of difficulty, in my opinion. We just come from Phase 2. We came out of Nomergan and we were able to clear Sunken Temple week 2. Now I know that week 1, it was really hard. They did some tuning. Week 2, it became much easier. But they over-tuned it and I think it became way too easy. But the core issue doesn't really stop with the difficulty of the dungeon. I think it's the fact that we don't have any sort of tiered content at all, right? We should have 5-man dungeon content, which we do have, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in terms of like pre-raid bis gearing, but we don't have like 5-man into 10-man into 20-man into 40-man. And the problem with that is you're not able to separate out the hardcore players or the semi-hardcore players from the really casual players. And I'm not necessarily advocating here for a 40-man raid. That's not really what I want, but I do want tiered difficulty, right? I do want there to be, and we'll just go ahead and jump into this point really quick, pre-raid bis dungeon grind. If my pre-raid bis is coming from the previous raid tier, that means I don't have to dungeon grind at all. And there's a couple, that's not entirely true. There are specific items that I did have to grind out for my pre-raid bis, but it wasn't much. The vast majority of my pre-raid bis came from Nomergan. So the problem with that is if my pre-raid bis comes from the previous raid tier, I am now able to jump into the new raid and clear it week 1 or 2. That's too quick in my opinion if you don't have some sort of like tiered raid difficulty. So the fact that my gear that I acquire at level 40 can clear a level 50 20-man raid, in my opinion, is a problem. We got to have some sort of tiered difficulty. I should be required to at least go in and do a pre-raid bis dungeon grind. I should be required to do some sort of 10-man content before going into 20-man content. So now the issue comes into, well, that's a lot of development work if we're doing like a seasonal thing here with phases. You know, you can't have a 10-man raid, a 20-man raid, and a 40-man raid. That's 3 completely different raids. And really what they could do and what they should do is they just need to have different difficulties for the same raid, right? So let's say we have, let's just go back to Nomergan, for example. We should have a 10-man version of it. We should have a 20-man version of it. And then maybe we could even have a 20-man heroic version of it. That way we could kind of separate the more hardcore players, give them something to play for rather than clearing the raid week 2. And I think one of the main problems we're having is people who take the game a little bit more seriously are just frankly getting bored of it, right? We're clearing raid week 2 and 3 in the previous raid tier set. I mean, there's nothing to really work for. Everything's just kind of being given to us. So there has to be some progression. I know this game was not made for streamers and for people trying to play the game more hardcore, right? That's what retail's for, right? But I think it has to have some sort of an aspect of that. It has to be a little difficult. I think right now it's just too easy across the board. We got to have some sort of tiered progression. Now, that's kind of my rant on that. Another thing I think that we need to have is we need to have at least 2 resets per week. I think people are getting bored waiting an entire week for a reset. We need to be able to get gear twice a week. That way we can kind of log on multiple times per week. On this character, I log on 1 time a week for about an hour and a half to clear the raid, then I'm done. So I need to have an incentive to log in multiple times per week. And I think this does bring me to another point here, and let's just go ahead and write it out. I think the gear rewards need to be better. Just kind of speaking to this real quick. I think if we did have a tiered difficulty, I think the rewards would kind of scale better. Uh, it just feels like, why am I in a raid getting blue items that are just marginally better than the previous raid tier? It just doesn't feel right to me. I feel like if you go do a 20-man raid, there should be some epics dropping, and there are some, but I feel like the majority of the gear dropping should be epics at the highest level of content. Now, is the raid that we're doing right now worthy of dropping epic gear? Probably not. But if there's a level of difficulty above that, or a couple levels above that, we need to get to a place to where epic gear is dropping from every single boss, but it doesn't need to be a handout. It needs to be a little bit difficult. So this is kind of all its own thing. Up next, need to incorporate the in-game world more. Incursions should not be faster than questing. They should be equal at best. So this is kind of a hot take. I know a lot of people like Incursions. I didn't, and I'm probably biased here a little bit because I did this on a PvP server originally. I'm on a PvE server now. We had a free transfer, so we took it. But Incursions on PvP servers were just terrible if you're in the minority. I mean, you just get camped. And unfortunately, it was so good that you just couldn't ignore it. So I'm not necessarily saying get rid of Incursions, but even with the, I think it's like a 50% XP buff they gave to questing, maybe even 100% at one point, I can't remember exactly, but it wasn't enough. Incursions were still better. So Incursions should never give more XP than questing. I think the most important aspect of Classic is the world that they built, and when they try to deviate away from that, I think it just makes the game unfun. So yeah, I just think that they need to incorporate the in-game world a little bit more. So we also have economy inflation, and this isn't necessarily something that's unique to Season of Discovery. I did want to include it on the list though, just because I do think it is a problem for new players who can't go out. And let's just say a new young player, for example, in high school, they can barely afford $15 a month to play the game, and now they're having to swipe their credit card to keep up with the player base. Or if they don't, they kind of fall behind. I do think that this is a problem that's almost impossible to tackle with gold botters. There's just too much, right? There's too much gold going around, and it's just impossible because the vast majority of the people who play this game are older people. I don't say old, but like, high 20s, 30s, and they can afford to swipe their credit card to give them a bump. And you have so many people doing that, you see this sort of rapid inflation, and it becomes very difficult as a new player who can't afford to do that to keep up with everybody else. So I don't really know how they could combat this, to be honest. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is one that we remove. I just wanted to put on the list for now. If anybody has any good ideas around this, put it in the comments below. Maybe they could buff like raw gold being dropped. There's obviously professions that they can farm on the auction house. Those prices are inflated, so they could go that route. But I do think economy inflation is one of those difficult things to tackle with all the botters, with all the credit cards being swiped, quest rewards giving like 8, 9, 10, I don't know exactly, 7, 8, 9 gold per turn in. There's just so much gold going around. There's kind of that gap between the new players and the people who've been playing the game for a long time. So if you guys have any good ideas on this one, please put it in the comments below. And then we also have this final section down here. So what we've done is we've taken an existing game, we phased it out, we slapped on some new runes, and labeled it as content. And I think this first point here kind of sums it up, right? It's really Classic minus, it's not Classic plus. And I think that's the reason they labeled this as Season of Discovery and not Classic plus, because it's literally Classic minus. It's the original Classic with just less, right? So I think that's a branding technique they use there. But there are some unintended issues with this, and I'm sure Blizzard was aware of this, but they're not balancing around it super well. So for example, something like a natural stopping point. So due to the fact that we work off a sort of skill-based system, right? A rank-based system, right? So Chain Hill, rank 1, 2, 3, whatever. Sometimes we're stopped at ranks that if we just had a couple more levels, we could have got the next rank of the ability and we would have been fine. We could have kept up in damage or healing or whatever. but some classes, some specs are getting kind of screwed over by being hit with this wall that's not a natural wall, that wasn't necessarily intended in the original game's design. I'm trying to think back exactly. Don't quote me on this necessarily, but I believe last phase, Chain Heal for Restoration Shaman, we got like rank 1 last phase, and we're just a couple levels off from getting rank 2, and a lot of other classes, a lot of other healing specs get their rank 2 abilities that we didn't get, so we were just kind of behind in the meters in general. And I'm not saying Resto Shaman was bad last phase. That's not what I'm saying. I understand the purpose of kind of Resto Shaman this phase is the kind of mana batteries, right? They're not necessarily there to pump out an insane amount of healing, but my point is this affects other classes more than others. And it just kind of depends on where you line up, where your ranks line up in that specific phase. And it would be fine if they balanced around it, but I mean, we can clearly see looking at tier graphs and whatnot that balancing just isn't there right now. You know, really, I guess my last point here is this should have revolved around level 60. It's just interesting, right, that we're kind of phasing this content out, but there's just not that much content. So I understand if you're going to stop us at level 40, you're going to stop us at level 50, but you got to give us more to do, especially because we have all these different dungeons that we can run, but they're pretty much useless to us because the gear rewards aren't there. Nobody wants to run the same 20-man raid once a week, get very minimal upgrades. That's why everybody's raid logging so much, is because there's just not that much to do. There's not that much to push for. You know, we beat the game, right, in week 2 or 3. And again, that kind of loops me back up to this entire section here, right, with tiered content, giving us more to do, more gear rewards, that sort of deal. So I do think that the system of Season of Discovery could work if there was just simply more content. You know, of course, if they fix like the balancing issues. So in my opinion, there has to be better balance and there has to be more progression. Plain and simple. If you agree, if you disagree, put it in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think. I think this is a very interesting topic. It'll be very interesting to see once we hit level 60, kind of where the game goes, the direction. I think it would be a mistake for them to immediately, you know, like after the level 60 content, go straight into like level 70 content. I don't think that's really what people are asking for. I think they're wanting Classic as a game, and then we just extend off of it. I don't think we're wanting to necessarily build a new game. And I think Blizzard's trying to rebuild the game in their own sort of, with their own sort of views. We want changes, but we don't necessarily want something completely new, if that makes sense. I think Classic as a standalone game is probably one of the best iterations of WoW that have ever come out, right? And it's the first one, right? Before any expansions or anything else, you got this huge world. You're not condensed to an island. You got quests. You have all types of raids, so many dungeons, so much to explore. It's a true MMO, and I think that's what people are going for. And I think Blizzard is trying to kind of phase away from that for some reason with things like, you know, Incursions, for example. I understand, I appreciate them like trying new stuff, but I think for the most part, people are just wanting new raids, a little bit of class tuning here and there. I think they're putting their development probably in the wrong areas, at least right now. You know, Incursions might make sense in the future, but I think right now we got to get Classic Plus figured out as a whole and stop trying to invent all these new crazy ideas. I think people just want a version of Classic that's balanced, gives good rewards, has a good progression system with new raid content. So, all right, that's my rant, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.